Tell me who you are.
I'm David Taylor. Dave Taylor.
Dave Taylor.
Tucker. Gil Evans called me.
What do you call you?
Tucker. We did a Grammy Award record. I played in this band for about 5 years, and at Sweet Basil's, we used to, every Monday, we did a live record Monday, and then we won a Grammy Award, except my name on the back was Dave Tucker. So they made a mistake. So from then on, I was Tucker to all the guys, man.
All right, Tucker.
So either one of them. You can call me
Tucker,
right,
Dave,
Tucker, Dave.
Dave, all right. So the, okay, so we're here playing on a sort of big band session. What would you call, since you have such great experience, the Mingus band, what would you call this? Would you call this a big band, a small band? What would that be?
Can I get a little left on you, man?
Yeah.
I started out, I went to Juilliard School of Music for 6 years in the 60s. And I was trained to be a classical musician. I played with the Philharmonic. I played with Leopold Stokowski. He was a Philly guy, Leopold Stokowski. But then I started playing with Chuck Israels in big band. And so I started changing my attitude about all those things. And then I wound up recording with Duke Ellington and playing with Thad Jones's band and George Russell's band and recording with Maynard, all these guys, right? I don't have a concept of classical and jazz music, man. So to me, it's all a matter of attitude. You know, you turn on the radio, you go like that, it's classical, you go like that. So that's how my mindset is. So when I see something like this and I hear the deep harmony and pseudo-Hindemithyan rhythm, I don't qualify it, man. I just try to jump in, you know.
So all right. So that's great because you get a particular interesting seat in the mix of things, where the notes that you get to participate in are special. They rock. They will sort of be a foundation. So how, from your viewpoint, playing today and playing through these arrangements, how do you feel about where that hits you as an artist? Since you are an artist, how does
I have about 10 solo records. I've gotten paid for almost every one of them. And I've set myself up in a situation where nobody tells me how to record or what to record. I don't look at this as one single day's experience. I look at it like I've been in this scene for 50 years, man. So I've been writing for myself for 10, 15 years and fairly successful. And I look at this as a cumulative thing. I'm honored to be here with these cats because they're spectacular. Steve is on one of my CDs from the 90s when he just came to town, you know. So I'm kind of lucky in that I'm playing in all these different scenes. I get an overview of New York. You know, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know how to answer the question.
No, that's great. I mean, if we look at music as sort of an interpretation of life.
That's how I'm dealing with it.
Yeah, and you look at New York City as a perfect example of, and Oliver Nelson as a guy that captures that compositionally. I guess our view of looking at someone like you that has such experiences, what do you see in this music that you played?
Well, I knew Oliver Nelson's name, and I've heard his music, and it was always, from a technical point of view, incredible.
So there's a good vibe.
The vibe is great, and that I have a function. Because the parts, genre parts that are so spectacular. I don't know what the original abstract parts looked like. If it was written for bass trombone originally, Oliver was 25 years ahead of the time. My instrument, the bass trombone, really didn't come into being until the mid-19th century. Hector Berlioz, a composer, he started using it. It wasn't used in the jazz scene until the late 1940s and 1950s. And my instrument, the bass trombone, wasn't a fully chromatic instrument until the mid-60s when they developed a second valve to put on it. So if Oliver Nelson was writing parts like this in the 60s, man, he was like way ahead of the time. You know, even the trumpet parts. I mean, he I know he wrote those. Those are spectacular. He had great respect for the musicians he worked with. That's really the main thing, man. Like when you hear about these old composers from the 17th, 18th, 19th century, they gravitated to Berlin, to Vienna, Paris, places like that, because that's where the great musicians were. And the great musicians inspired the composers to go further. So Oliver was in L.A. for the most part, right?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, because he wound up there because of his TV and film writing.
Right, and they had some technically spectacular wind players there. So they probably spurred him on to open up his creativity. It's a reciprocal thing, you know.
So when you hear having that function and playing some interesting notes, what?
How do I put personality into it without upsetting the substructure of the band? That's to me. That's one of my. I want to put as much personality as I can into parts that serve functionally as a foundation. So I'm trying to mess with the foundation. I'm trying to make it silly putty rather than concrete.
And do you think that, like an arranger like John, who's sort of reimagining the Nelson viewpoint, has given you the tools to do that?
Of course. John and I met because I did a recording session for him with the first trombonist of the Philadelphia Orchestra. Adam Unsworth, the French horn player, was a member of the Philadelphia Orchestra. So I, through Nitzan Horowitz is the guy's name, John liked what I was doing. We had a scene a little bit because he was trying to record me with a classical kind of a setup, but then when I told him I was at home with these people, he took me upstairs to show me his whole cache of stuff. He recorded me on this while he recorded the other people on his more classically oriented setup, you know. And then Adam Unsworth and I did a duo CD that John lent microphones for. So it's been this, and I guess John heard my playings in other places, so he trusted me.
Well, it sounds great. And you mentioned John had a cache of stuff. What stuff was that?
Microphones, RCAs, Neumanns, Sheps. I mean, top names. And he seems like a really. If he was a cigar smoker, man, he'd be down in Cuba before he was able to go, man. You understand? Right. Yeah, he's Bugatti, this guy, man. I get the vibe. Awesome. You know, and he approaches the music that way, you know. Gil Evans was very slow. Took his time. He's taking his time. He's nitpicking, he's going every bar. If something isn't quite right, it's a universe he has to change. You have to admire that.
It's big time.
It is, man. It is. And the guys, it's really a more eclectic array of musicians here than you would imagine. You know, like Dave Ballou's a college professor. Ryan's a college professor. One of the trumpet players back there has a doctor of music degree. One of the other guys is a street guy. One of the, you know, it's amazing. I don't even know how he assembled everybody. But he waited. He first called me for this gig, I don't know, months ago, and he was trying to wig out when it was comfortable for everybody. He had a set group in mind, and he was willing to change his whole schedule to modify and get everybody in the right place at the right time. You know, and it's amazing, man. You know, it's love, man. You're showing love. You said you were a student here.
I was.
What years was that, man?
I was with him for 4 years, every day, probably 80 hours a week.
What kind of guy was he back when you knew him?
He was like Phil Ramone, kicked your butt all the time. And he was relentless when it came to the notes. You've had all these years of experience. As a composer looking to find identity through a career of writing and also identifying that in other people like you just described, you're sitting here with John, who's another composer, arranger, and he's developed this band that has an identity that's not normal. You know? So how would you describe his identity to someone who doesn't know anything about him?
I think that he and I have a kind of a kinship in that I have a funny feeling he's a highly educated man. I don't know too much about his background. Is he? Is he? I mean, he was a teacher, a college teacher, so he must have some.
I think more self-taught, not self-taught, but Dennis Andoli was a big part of his education.
That's a name you don't hear that much. But through Bert Collins, a Philly guy, you know those names,
Mm-hmm.
Bert Collins? I played in he had a big band. And Chubby Jackson, you know those names, the bass player? I played in his band. You know that his big band, but they were brothers, right? But anyway, he had his book in a spiral notebook.
Yes, Dennis Andoli and his brother.
I've never seen anything like that, man. A spiral notebook. And we had a bunch of rehearsals. It was pretty happy. I like Philly.
So I want to get an idea of what it feels like for you. We talked about it, but like a little bit more specific maybe on you played in all these bands. So what's it feel like to be in this thing today?
Part of history. I see this. I see this as an historic reestablishment it's not a ghost band. That's what I see it as. It's taking the material of a historically significant composer whose music really does show a specific time in history. But he's trying to take it to the next place. I mean, the choice of Danny Gottlieb as the drummer is heavy. Because John could have gone in a more traditional route. But when you have a drummer like that, and a piano player like that, mixed in with Richmond, that makes the rhythm section take a different attitude towards its historical position, and I think it kicked the band into another place. So I see it as a next step for a historical figure. He's doing great. It's not a ghost band.
Awesome.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it.
No, thank you, and maybe we'll talk some more.
I would appreciate it, man. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Thank you.